Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight, I've got something absolutely wild for you guys. I found this treasure trove of completely unhinged Reddit drama from the Am I the Bad Person subreddit. And honestly, some of these stories are so intense, I had to read them 3 times just to process what was happening. These situations are so messy that I'm not even sure where to begin. But let's be real. Who doesn't love diving into other people's chaos? Anyway, grab your favorite snack and get comfortable in bed, because we're about to explore some peak internet drama that'll make your own problems seem pretty manageable. Let's jump right in. Our first story comes from someone dealing with what might be the most entitled behavior I've ever encountered in a family setting. Am I the bad person for selling my deceased father's motorcycle without telling my stepmother? My dad passed away 8 months ago after a long battle with cancer. He was 62 and had been married to my stepmother Linda for about 6 years. I'm 28 and my relationship with Linda has always been complicated, but it got much worse after Dad died. When my father was diagnosed 3 years ago, he made sure to get his affairs in order. He worked with a lawyer to create a detailed will that specified exactly how his belongings should be distributed. The house went to Linda since they owned it jointly, but most of his personal possessions were left to me and my younger sister Rachel. This included his tools, his books, his record collection, and most importantly, to this story, his 1974 Harley-Davidson motorcycle. That bike was my dad's pride and joy. He'd spent countless weekends restoring it to perfect condition, and we'd taken so many rides together over the years. Some of my best memories with him involve that motorcycle. He taught me how to ride on it when I was 16, and he always said he wanted me to have it someday. The will was very clear that the bike was mine. Linda seemed fine with the will initially. She was dealing with her own grief and didn't seem particularly interested in Dad's belongings. She kept asking me to come collect his things because she said having them around was too painful. I took my time going through everything because it was emotional, but I eventually moved most of his possessions to my apartment or put them in storage. The motorcycle was the last item I needed to deal with. It was stored in the garage, and Linda said she wanted it gone because she never used that side of the garage, and it was just taking up space. I agreed to move it, but I needed to figure out where to store it since I live in an apartment complex without garage access. While I was researching storage options, Linda started acting strange about the bike. She began making comments about how valuable it was and how much money it could be worth. She'd looked it up online and discovered that restored bikes from that era could sell for $15,000 to $20,000. Suddenly, she was very interested in my dad's motorcycle. Linda started suggesting that maybe we should sell the bike and split the money since she was struggling financially after Dad's death. She said it seemed selfish for me to keep such an expensive item when she could really use the help with mortgage payments and medical bills that were still coming in. She said Dad would have wanted his family to take care of each other. I reminded Linda that the will specifically left the motorcycle to me and that I had no intention of selling it. I explained that it had enormous sentimental value and that I was planning to restore it further and actually ride it in my dad's memory. I said I understood she was having financial difficulties, but that didn't change what Dad had wanted. Linda became increasingly pushy about the bike over the following weeks. She kept bringing up her financial situation and making comments about how much the bike was worth just sitting in the garage. She suggested that I was being selfish by keeping something so valuable when family members were struggling. She even offered to buy it from me at a reduced price, saying that would be fair to everyone. The situation escalated when Linda started researching the legal aspects of the inheritance. She contacted a lawyer to ask if there was any way to contest the will or argue that such an expensive item should be part of the shared estate. When I found out about this, I realized I needed to get the motorcycle out of her possession immediately. Last month, I arranged to have the bike moved to a storage facility. When I went to collect it, Linda became very emotional and said I was being cruel and greedy. She said she couldn't believe I would take away her financial security over a piece of metal that I'd probably never even use. She accused me of not caring about her well-being and said Dad would be disappointed in me. But here's where the story gets complicated. After storing the bike for a few weeks, I started having second thoughts about keeping it. The storage fees were adding up. I didn't actually have a good plan for when I'd be able to start riding it. And honestly, Linda's financial situation was weighing on me. Dad had cared about her, and I knew he wouldn't want her to lose the house. I made the decision to sell the motorcycle. I found a collector who was interested in bikes from that era, and after some negotiation, I sold it for $18,500. It was a good price, and the buyer was someone who would appreciate and care for the bike properly. I used the money to pay off some of my own debt and put the rest into savings. I figured this was what made the most sense given my current life situation. I wasn't ready to be a motorcycle owner, and the money would be more useful to me right now than a bike sitting in storage. The problem is that I didn't tell Linda I was selling it. I was worried she'd either try to stop me or expect me to give her some of the money, and I didn't want to deal with either scenario. I thought it would be easier to just handle the sale privately and avoid the drama. Linda found out about the sale 2 weeks later when she ran into the storage facility owner at the grocery store. He mentioned something about me moving the motorcycle out, and when Linda pressed for details, she learned that I'd sold it. She was absolutely furious when she confronted me about it. Linda said she couldn't believe I'd sold the bike without even telling her, especially after all her discussions about needing financial help. She said it was cruel and dishonest to handle such a major decision secretly when she'd been hoping we could work something out together. She accused me of being manipulative and said I deliberately excluded her from something that affected both of us. I tried to explain that the bike was legally mine and that I had every right to sell it without consulting anyone. I said I'd made the decision based on my own financial needs and circumstances, and that Linda had no claim to the proceeds. I pointed out that she'd been pressuring me to sell it anyway, so she should be happy that I'd finally done what she wanted. Linda said the issue wasn't that I'd sold the bike, but that I'd been sneaky about it and hadn't given her a chance to make an offer or discuss the situation. She said we were family and that family members should communicate about major decisions, especially ones involving items that had belonged to my father. The argument escalated when Linda said she was going to contact her lawyer again to see if she had any legal recourse. She said, "My secretive behavior proved that I knew I was doing something wrong and that maybe there were grounds to challenge the sale or demand a portion of the proceeds." I told Linda that she could contact whatever lawyers she wanted, but that the bike had been legally mine and I'd had every right to sell it. I said her threats were just proving that I'd been right to handle the sale privately because she would have tried to interfere or make demands. Since this confrontation, Linda has been telling other family members that I'm greedy and dishonest. She's painting me as someone who took advantage of her grief to secretly profit from my father's belongings. She's also been sharing details about her financial struggles and implying that I could have helped her but chose not to. Some relatives think Linda has a point about me being secretive and that I should have at least informed her about my plans. They say that even if I had no legal obligation to include her, it would have been more respectful to be transparent about such a major decision. Others support my choice and say Linda was being manipulative by trying to pressure me into selling something that clearly belonged to me. They think her lawyer consultations and continued demands show that she was never going to respect my ownership of the bike. The whole situation has created a rift in our family during what's already a difficult time of grief and adjustment. Linda and I barely speak now, and other family members feel caught in the middle of our conflict. I keep wondering if I should have handled the sale differently. Maybe I should have told Linda about my plans, even if I wasn't willing to share the proceeds. But I also feel like her pressure and legal threats justified my decision to keep the sale private. That's the end of that story. This situation perfectly illustrates how grief and financial stress can turn family relationships toxic. Linda's attempts to manipulate the inheritance and involve lawyers showed exactly why keeping the sale private was the right move. Let's move to our next story, which involves wedding planning drama that spiraled completely out of control. Am I the bad person for uninviting my maid of honor after she tried to change my wedding dress? I'm getting married in 2 months, and what should be the happiest time of my life has turned into an absolute nightmare because of my supposed best friend's behavior. My maid of honor is Stephanie, and we've been friends since college. When I got engaged last year, asking her to be my maid of honor felt like an obvious choice. We've been through everything together, and I wanted her to be part of my special day. For the first several months of wedding planning, everything seemed fine. Stephanie was supportive and helpful, offering opinions when I asked, and generally being the kind of friend I needed during the stressful planning process. The problems started when I found my wedding dress. I'd been looking for months and trying on dozens of dresses at different shops. Nothing felt right until I found this gorgeous, vintage-inspired gown at a small boutique. The moment I put it on, I knew it was perfect. It's a classic A-line silhouette with delicate lace sleeves and a modest neckline. It's elegant and timeless, exactly what I'd always envisioned for my wedding day. When I showed pictures of the dress to my bridal party, everyone was supportive and said it was beautiful. Stephanie's initial reaction was positive too. She said it was a lovely dress and that I looked radiant in it. I was so excited to have found the perfect gown, and I thought everyone was happy with my choice. But over the following weeks, Stephanie started making subtle comments about the dress. She'd mention seeing other dresses that might be more flattering, or suggest that maybe I should keep looking since I still had time. At first, I thought she was just trying to be helpful, but her comments became more frequent and more pointed. Stephanie began bringing up specific concerns about my dress choice. She said the neckline was too conservative and that I should show more skin on my wedding day. She suggested that the lace sleeves were old-fashioned and might look dated in photos. She even said the A-line silhouette was too safe and that I should consider something more form-fitting to show off my figure. I tried to explain to Stephanie that I loved my dress exactly as it was and that it reflected my personal style and comfort level. I said I wasn't interested in changing the neckline or the sleeves because I felt beautiful and confident in the dress as designed. I thought that would be the end of the discussion, but Stephanie kept pushing. The situation escalated when Stephanie started researching ways to modify my dress. She found a seamstress who specializes in wedding gown alterations and got quotes for changing the neckline to a sweetheart style, removing the lace sleeves and taking in the waist to create a more fitted silhouette. She presented this information to me as if she was doing me a favor by finding solutions to what she saw as problems with my dress. I was shocked that Stephanie had gone behind my back to research alterations I'd never requested. I told her firmly that I didn't want to modify my dress and that I was happy with it as purchased. I said I appreciated her concern, but that my wedding dress was my choice to make and I wasn't interested in her suggestions for changes. Stephanie seemed hurt by my response and said she was only trying to help me look my best on my wedding day. She said she was worried I'd regret choosing such a conservative dress and that I should trust her judgment as someone who knows fashion. She pointed out that she works in marketing for a fashion company and has a good eye for what looks good on different body types. Things got worse when Stephanie started involving other people in her campaign to change my dress. She brought up her concerns with other bridesmaids, asking them if they thought my dress was flattering or if they agreed that it needed modifications. She also mentioned her worries to my mother, saying she was concerned that I was settling for a dress that didn't show off my best features. Some of the bridesmaids felt uncomfortable being dragged into this discussion, but they generally supported my right to choose whatever dress I wanted. My mother was annoyed that Stephanie was causing drama about something that should be my personal decision. But Stephanie interpreted their responses as validation of her concerns. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago when I discovered that Stephanie had actually contacted my dress shop to ask about modification options. She'd called pretending to be me and inquired about changing the neckline and sleeves of my specific dress. The shop called me to confirm these alterations, which is how I found out about Stephanie's deception. I was absolutely furious when I learned what Stephanie had done, impersonating me to discuss modifications to my wedding dress without my knowledge or consent crossed every possible boundary. I called her immediately and demanded an explanation for her completely inappropriate behavior. Stephanie's response was even more shocking than her original actions. She said she'd called the shop because she was worried I wasn't thinking clearly about my dress choice and that someone needed to look out for my best interests. She said she knew I'd thank her later when I had beautiful wedding photos instead of regretting a conservative dress choice. She actually tried to justify her deception by saying she'd been planning to present the modification options to me as a surprise, and that she thought I'd appreciate having the research done for me. When I pointed out that she'd literally impersonated me, she said it was just easier than explaining the whole situation to the shop staff. I told Stephanie that her behavior was completely unacceptable and that she'd violated my trust in the worst possible way. I said that my wedding dress was my choice alone and that her attempts to manipulate the situation were inappropriate and hurtful. I demanded that she stop interfering with my wedding plans and respect my decisions. Instead of apologizing, Stephanie doubled down on her position. She said I was overreacting to her trying to help and that I was being stubborn about accepting good advice. She said she'd put a lot of thought and research into improving my dress and that I was being ungrateful for her efforts. The argument escalated when Stephanie said she couldn't stand by and watch me make a mistake that would ruin my wedding photos and my memories of the day. She said that as my maid of honor, it was her responsibility to make sure I looked my best, even if I didn't appreciate her help at the time. That's when I realized that Stephanie wasn't going to stop her inappropriate behavior or respect my boundaries. I made the decision to uninvite her from the wedding entirely. I told her that I couldn't have someone in my bridal party who didn't respect my choices and who had already proven she'd go behind my back to interfere with my plans. Stephanie was shocked when I uninvited her and said I was being dramatic and vindictive. She said she'd been trying to help me and that I was throwing away our friendship over a disagreement about a dress. She accused me of being oversensitive and said I'd regret pushing away someone who cared about me enough to give honest feedback. I explained to Stephanie that the issue wasn't about the dress itself, but about her refusal to respect my boundaries and her deceptive behavior. I said that impersonating me to discuss modifications I'd explicitly rejected was a betrayal of trust that I couldn't overlook. Since I uninvited Stephanie, she's been telling mutual friends that I'm being a bridezilla and that I kicked her out of the wedding over minor disagreements about fashion. She's portraying herself as the victim of my unreasonable demands and saying that I can't handle any input about my wedding choices. Several friends have reached out to ask about the situation, and opinions are divided. Some people think Stephanie went too far with her interference, and that impersonating me was completely inappropriate. Others think I'm overreacting and that I should forgive Stephanie since she was trying to help, even if her methods were wrong. The most frustrating part is that Stephanie is still trying to convince people that her concerns about my dress were valid and that I'm making a mistake by not listening to her advice. She's shown photos of my dress to mutual friends and asked them if they think it needs modifications, trying to build support for her position. I've had to ask other bridesmaids to take on some of the responsibilities that Stephanie was supposed to handle, which has created additional stress during an already busy time. I've also had to explain the situation to vendors who were expecting to work with Stephanie as my maid of honor. My fiancé supports my decision to uninvite Stephanie and says her behavior was manipulative and controlling. He thinks I was right to set firm boundaries and that Stephanie's response to being uninvited proved she wasn't going to respect my choices anyway. But some family members think I should try to work things out with Stephanie, since we've been friends for so long. They say friendships are more important than wedding drama, and that I might regret losing a close relationship over what they see as a misunderstanding. I keep questioning whether I made the right decision by uninviting Stephanie. Maybe I should have tried harder to resolve the conflict, or given her another chance to respect my boundaries. But I also feel like her deceptive behavior and continued interference showed that she wasn't going to stop trying to control my wedding choices. The whole situation has cast a shadow over my wedding planning and made what should be a joyful time feel stressful and complicated. I hate that I've lost a friendship during what's supposed to be such a happy period of my life. That's the end of that story. Stephanie's behavior went way beyond giving advice into manipulation and deception. Impersonating someone to discuss modifying their wedding dress is such a violation of trust and boundaries that it's genuinely shocking. Our next story comes from someone dealing with family financial drama that reveals some truly disturbing priorities. Am I the bad person for refusing to pay for my brother's rehab after he stole from me? My younger brother, Tyler, has been struggling with addiction issues for the past 4 years. He's 25 now, and his problems with alcohol and prescription pills have gotten progressively worse since he lost his job during the pandemic. I'm 31, and I've tried to be supportive, but Tyler's addiction has put our entire family through hell. Over the years, I've helped Tyler in numerous ways. I've lent him money for rent, groceries, and bills more times than I can count. I've driven him to counseling appointments and Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. I've let him stay at my apartment when he was between housing situations. I've covered his phone bill, bought him clothes for job interviews, and even paid for dental work when he couldn't afford it. My family always emphasized that we should stick together and help each other through difficult times. When Tyler first started having problems, my parents asked me to be patient and supportive because addiction is a disease and family support is crucial for recovery. I believed them and tried to be the kind of brother Tyler needed during his struggles. But Tyler's behavior became increasingly erratic and destructive over time. He'd disappear for days without contacting anyone, show up drunk or high at family gatherings, and make promises about getting clean that he'd break within weeks. He'd ask for help with genuine emergencies, then spend the money I gave him on drugs or alcohol instead of rent or food. The pattern got worse when Tyler started lying about why he needed help. He'd say his car needed repairs, then I'd find out he'd actually been evicted and needed deposit money for a new apartment. He'd claim he needed money for medication, then use it to buy drugs. Every time I tried to set boundaries or ask for proof of how he was spending money, he'd accuse me of not trusting him or not understanding how hard recovery was. 6 months ago, Tyler seemed to be doing better. He'd been attending outpatient counseling regularly and had managed to keep a part-time job for almost 3 months. He was living in a sober living house and seemed committed to staying clean. My parents and I were cautiously optimistic that he was finally turning his life around. During this period, Tyler asked if he could borrow $2,500 to buy a used car. He said having reliable transportation would help him get to work and counseling appointments, and that it was a crucial step in maintaining his sobriety. He showed me listings for several affordable cars and promised to pay me back $50 per month once he was working full-time. I was hesitant to lend Tyler such a large amount of money, but his counselor supported the idea and said that having independence and reliable transportation could be important for his recovery. My parents also encouraged me to help, saying this might be the assistance Tyler needed to get fully back on his feet. I decided to help Tyler with the car purchase, but I insisted on being involved in the process. We went to look at cars together. I reviewed the paperwork, and I wrote the check directly to the seller to ensure the money went where Tyler said it would. I felt good about helping my brother take a positive step forward in his life. For a few weeks, everything seemed fine. Tyler was driving to work regularly and seemed proud of his independence. He'd text me photos of himself at his job or at counseling appointments, showing that he was using the car for productive purposes. I thought I'd made a good decision by helping him with this purchase. Then Tyler relapsed. He disappeared for almost a week, missed several days of work, and stopped responding to calls and texts from family members. When he finally contacted me, He was calling from a police station. He'd been arrested for driving under the influence and needed someone to pick him up. When I got to the police station, Tyler was a mess. He was obviously still intoxicated and couldn't give me a coherent explanation of what had happened. The car was impounded and there had been an accident, though fortunately no one was seriously injured. Tyler's license was suspended and he was facing criminal charges. Over the following days, I learned more about Tyler's relapse. He'd been using drugs heavily for at least 2 weeks before the arrest. He'd been fired from his job for showing up intoxicated and had been kicked out of the sober living house for violating their substance abuse policies. He'd been sleeping in the car I'd helped him buy, but the worst discovery came when I was helping Tyler clean out his belongings from the impounded car. Hidden under the spare tire, I found several expensive items that didn't belong to him. There was a laptop, some jewelry, and electronic equipment that Tyler initially claimed he'd bought with money from his job. When I pressed Tyler for more details about these items, the truth came out. He'd been stealing from friends, family members, and even his former roommates at the sober living house to fund his drug use. The laptop belonged to his former counselor, who'd been letting Tyler use her office for private phone calls. The jewelry had been taken from our aunt's house during a family dinner. The electronics had been stolen from his sober living house roommates. I was devastated to learn that Tyler had been committing theft to support his addiction. This wasn't just about him relapsing or making bad personal choices. He'd been actively victimizing people who cared about him and trusted him. I realized that some of the money I'd given him over the years had probably been used to replace things he'd stolen and then sold for drugs. The situation got worse when Tyler's theft victims started contacting our family. His former counselor was considering pressing charges unless the laptop was returned, and she was compensated for the time she'd wasted dealing with the theft. Our aunt was hurt and angry about the jewelry, some of which had sentimental value that couldn't be replaced. The sober living house was demanding reimbursement for the stolen electronics and was threatening to pursue legal action. My parents were mortified by Tyler's behavior, but immediately started talking about how to help him. They said he obviously needed more intensive treatment and that we should look into residential rehabilitation programs. They found a facility that specialized in addiction treatment and dual diagnosis, but the cost was $45,000 for a 90-day program. My parents don't have that kind of money available, and Tyler certainly doesn't have any resources of his own. They asked me to help pay for his treatment, arguing that this might be Tyler's last chance to get clean and that family support could make the difference between life and death for him. I told my parents that I wasn't willing to pay for Tyler's rehab treatment, especially not after discovering his theft activities. I said I'd already given him thousands of dollars over the years and that he'd used my generosity to fund criminal behavior. I felt betrayed and manipulated by Tyler's lies and theft. My parents were shocked by my refusal to help pay for treatment. They said Tyler's addiction was a disease and that he needed medical help, not punishment. They argued that withholding treatment because I was angry about his behavior was cruel and could result in Tyler's death if he continued using drugs. I explained that my decision wasn't about punishment, but about refusing to enable Tyler's destructive behavior any further. I said that every time our family rescued Tyler from consequences, we prevented him from hitting bottom and finding motivation for real change. I pointed out that he'd stolen from people while I was actively supporting him, which proved that family financial help wasn't actually helping his recovery. The argument with my parents escalated when they said I was being selfish and vindictive. They accused me of caring more about the money I'd lost than about Tyler's life and recovery. They said that if Tyler died from an overdose, I'd have to live with knowing I could have helped save him, but chose not to. Tyler himself has been calling and texting me constantly, alternating between apologies and anger. Sometimes he acknowledges his mistakes and promises that residential treatment would be different from his previous attempts at recovery. Other times he accuses me of abandoning him when he needs help most and says I'm being cruel by holding his mistakes against him. The pressure from my family has been intense. Extended relatives who've heard about the situation have opinions about whether I should help pay for Tyler's treatment. Some support my decision to stop enabling his behavior, while others think I'm being heartless during a medical crisis. The most manipulative part is that Tyler and my parents keep framing this as a life or death decision that's entirely up to me. They say that if I don't help pay for treatment, Tyler will probably die from his addiction and that I'll be responsible for that outcome. They're making me feel like Tyler's survival depends on my financial contribution. But I've done research on addiction treatment, and the success rates for expensive residential programs aren't dramatically better than outpatient options, especially for people who aren't internally motivated to change. Tyler has been through multiple treatment programs already, and the problem hasn't been lack of access to care. The problem has been his unwillingness to prioritize recovery over drug use. I've also talked to other families who've dealt with addiction, and many of them said that continuing to rescue their addicted family members actually prolonged the addiction by preventing natural consequences. Several people told me that their loved ones didn't get serious about recovery until the family stopped providing financial support. The theft issue makes this situation even more complicated for me. Tyler didn't just hurt himself with his drug use. He actively victimized other people to fund his addiction. Some of those victims were family members and people who'd been trying to help him. I feel like paying for his treatment would be rewarding criminal behavior. I keep wondering if I'm making the right decision by refusing to pay for Tyler's rehab. Maybe residential treatment really would be different this time, and maybe my financial support could save his life. But I also feel like I've already sacrificed enough of my own financial security and emotional well-being trying to help Tyler, and that continuing to rescue him isn't actually helping him learn to take responsibility for his choices. The whole situation has created a rift in my family that feels permanent. My parents barely speak to me now, and when they do, it's to guilt-trip me about Tyler's situation. Other relatives are taking sides, and family gatherings have become tense and uncomfortable. That's the end of that story. This situation shows how addiction can turn family dynamics into manipulation and emotional blackmail. Tyler's parents are essentially asking their other son to fund criminal behavior while framing it as a life-saving intervention. Let's move to our next story, which involves roommate drama that escalated into what can only be described as psychological warfare. Am I the bad person for moving out without telling my roommate? I've been living with my roommate Jasmine for almost 2 years, and what started as a decent living arrangement slowly devolved into the most toxic situation I've ever experienced. I'm finally free from that nightmare, but the way I handled my exit has created drama that I'm still dealing with weeks later. When Jasmine and I first became roommates, everything seemed fine. We were both graduate students looking for affordable housing near campus, and splitting a 2-bedroom apartment made financial sense for both of us. Jasmine seemed responsible and clean during our initial meetings, and we had similar schedules and lifestyles. I thought I'd found the perfect roommate situation. For the first 6 months, things went smoothly. We kept common areas clean, respected each other's space, and generally stayed out of each other's way. Jasmine was usually pleasant to be around, and we occasionally watched movies together or shared meals. I felt lucky to have found such a compatible living situation. The problems started gradually when Jasmine began dating her boyfriend Marcus. At first, his visits were reasonable, any 2 or 3 nights per week, and he was polite and respectful when he was around. But over time, Marcus essentially moved into our apartment without contributing to rent or utilities. Marcus started sleeping over almost every night and using our shower, kitchen, and living room as if he lived there. He'd eat food from our shared refrigerator, use our internet for his online gaming, and even receive packages at our address. When I mentioned to Jasmine that Marcus seemed to be living with us unofficially, she said it was just a temporary situation while he looked for his own place. Months went by, and Marcus never found his own place. Instead, he became more comfortable treating our apartment as his home. He'd invite his friends over without asking, play loud video games late into the night, and leave his belongings scattered throughout the common areas. Our utility bills increased significantly, and our internet became unreliable because Marcus was constantly streaming and gaming. I tried to address the situation diplomatically with Jasmine multiple times. I pointed out that Marcus was essentially a third roommate who wasn't paying rent, and that it wasn't fair for me to subsidize his living expenses. I suggested that either Marcus should start contributing financially, or he needed to spend more time at his own place. Jasmine's responses to my concerns were always dismissive. She'd say that Marcus wasn't really living with us, since he had his own apartment, even though he spent maybe one night per week there. She'd promised that the situation was temporary, but nothing ever changed. When I pressed harder, she'd accuse me of being unwelcoming and said I was trying to control her personal relationships. The situation escalated when I started graduate school fieldwork that required me to spend long hours away from the apartment. When I'd come home exhausted after 14-hour days, I'd find Marcus and his friends playing loud video games in the living room or cooking elaborate meals that left the kitchen a disaster. My attempts to use common spaces in my own apartment became battles over noise levels and cleaning responsibilities. Things got worse when Jasmine and Marcus started treating me like an unwelcome guest in my own home. They'd make plans for the apartment without consulting me, like inviting people over for parties or deciding to rearrange furniture in the living room. When I objected, they'd say I was being antisocial and that I should be more flexible about shared space usage. The final straw came when I discovered that Jasmine had given Marcus a key to our apartment without asking me. I found out when I came home early one day to find Marcus there alone, cooking dinner and watching television as if he owned the place. When I asked how he'd gotten in, he casually mentioned that Jasmine had given him a key weeks earlier. I was furious that Jasmine had made such a major decision without consulting me. Having a key meant Marcus could access our apartment any time, whether Jasmine was there or not. I didn't feel safe or comfortable having someone who wasn't on the lease coming and going as he pleased, especially someone who'd already shown disrespect for boundaries and shared spaces. When I confronted Jasmine about giving Marcus a key, she said it was convenient since he was there so often anyway. She couldn't understand why I was upset about it, and said I was being paranoid and controlling. She accused me of having some kind of personal problem with Marcus, rather than legitimate concerns about living arrangements. I realized that Jasmine had no intention of addressing my concerns or changing the living situation. She'd decided that Marcus was going to essentially live in our apartment, and she didn't care how that affected me or our roommate arrangement. I started seriously considering moving out, but I was locked into a lease for several more months. The situation became unbearable when Marcus started bringing his dog to our apartment without permission. This wasn't an occasional visit. She was keeping his dog there most days while he was at work, and the dog would bark constantly and chew on furniture. We weren't allowed to have pets according to our lease, so this was also putting me at risk of eviction or fines. When I told Jasmine that the dog situation was unacceptable and could get us in legal trouble, she said I was being dramatic and that the landlord would never find out. She said the dog was only there temporarily while Marcus figured out better arrangements, but I could tell this was another lie based on how comfortable Marcus had become with the arrangement. I started looking for ways to break my lease early, but the penalties were significant and I couldn't afford to pay several months of rent to escape the situation. I felt trapped in my own home and was becoming anxious and depressed from the constant stress of living with people who didn't respect boundaries or basic courtesy. The breaking point came when I returned from a week-long research trip to find that Jasmine and Marcus had converted our storage closet into a makeshift bedroom for Marcus's friend who was visiting from out of town. They'd moved some of my stored belongings to my bedroom without permission and had essentially given away part of our shared space to accommodate another unofficial roommate. I realized that no amount of discussion or boundary setting was going to change Jasmine's behavior. She'd decided that our apartment was her personal space to do with as she pleased. regardless of how it affected me or violated our roommate agreement. I needed to get out of the situation as quickly as possible. I found a subletter who was willing to take over my portion of the lease for the remaining 4 months. The process took about 3 weeks to arrange, including getting approval from the landlord and completing the necessary paperwork. During this time, I didn't tell Jasmine about my plans because I was worried she might try to interfere with the subletting process or create additional drama. I also didn't trust Jasmine to handle the transition respectfully based on how she'd responded to my previous concerns. I was worried she might try to make my remaining time in the apartment even more difficult or find ways to sabotage my security deposit return. On the day my subletter was approved and ready to move in, I packed all my belongings and moved out while Jasmine and Marcus were both at work. I left a note explaining that I'd found a subletter to take over my lease responsibilities and providing contact information for the new roommate. I also left my key and a forwarding address for security deposit purposes. Jasmine came home to find my room empty and my replacement already moving in. She called me screaming about how I'd ambushed her and left her with a stranger as a roommate without any discussion or preparation. She said I'd been sneaky and manipulative and that I'd put her in an impossible situation. I explained to Jasmine that I'd tried to address our living situation problems for months without any cooperation from her. I said that her refusal to respect boundaries or communicate about issues had made it impossible for me to feel comfortable discussing my moving plans with her. Jasmine said that, regardless of our disagreements, I should have given her notice that I was planning to move out. She said she deserved time to prepare for a new roommate and that springing a stranger on her was cruel and inconsiderate. She accused me of being vindictive and trying to punish her for the Marcus situation. The drama escalated when Jasmine started telling mutual friends that I'd abandoned her without warning and stuck her with a random roommate she'd never met. She portrayed herself as the victim of my sudden departure and said I'd been secretive and dishonest about my intentions. Several friends have reached out asking about the situation, and opinions are mixed. Some people think I should have given Jasmine more warning about my plans to move out, even if our living situation was problematic. Others understand why I kept my moving plans private, given Jasmine's history of dismissing my concerns and boundary violations. The most frustrating part is that Jasmine is completely reframing the narrative to make herself look like the innocent victim of my unreasonable behavior. She's not acknowledging any of the issues that led to my decision to move out, and she's acting as if my departure was completely unpredictable and unfair. My subletter has since told me that Jasmine was initially hostile and unwelcoming, but that Marcus moved out shortly after I left. Apparently, without me there to subsidize his living expenses and deal with his presence, the unofficial roommate arrangement became less appealing for everyone involved. I feel relieved to be out of such a toxic living situation, but I also wonder if I should have handled my departure differently. Maybe I should have given Jasmine some warning about my plans, even if I didn't trust her to handle the information well. That's the end of that story. 2 years of having an unofficial third roommate and his dog taking over shared space while being completely dismissed when raising concerns would drive anyone to extreme measures. Jasmine created a situation where honest communication was impossible, then acted shocked when her roommate stopped trying to communicate. Our next story involves holiday family drama that reveals some truly disturbing manipulation tactics. Am I the bad person for ruining Christmas by not cooking dinner? Every year for the past 7 years, I've been the one responsible for cooking Christmas dinner for my entire extended family. What started as a volunteer offer when I was 22 has somehow become my mandatory responsibility, and this year I finally decided I'd had enough. I should provide some background about how this tradition started. When I was fresh out of college and living at home, my grandmother was getting too old to handle cooking for large family gatherings. Christmas dinner had always been at her house, with her famous recipes and elaborate spread that everyone loved. When she started having health problems, the family was worried that we'd have to abandon the tradition or settle for a much simpler meal. I offered to learn my grandmother's recipes and take over the cooking responsibilities. I was young, enthusiastic, and didn't have much else going on during the holidays. It seemed like a meaningful way to help my family and preserve traditions that were important to everyone. My grandmother was thrilled to teach me her techniques, and I enjoyed spending time with her learning family recipes. That first Christmas, I cooked for 18 people and pulled off a fairly successful meal. Everyone was appreciative and impressed that I'd managed to recreate my grandmother's dishes. The positive feedback felt wonderful, and I was proud to have contributed something meaningful to our family celebration. But somewhere along the way, my voluntary contribution became an expectation rather than a generous offer. By the third year, family members were making requests for specific dishes and criticizing aspects of the meal that didn't meet their preferences. My aunt wanted me to make stuffing differently. My uncle thought the turkey was too dry. My cousins complained that I wasn't making enough desserts. Instead of appreciating that I was doing all the work for free, people started treating me like a catering service that needed to meet their individual demands. They'd call weeks before Christmas with special requests or dietary restrictions, expecting me to accommodate everyone's preferences while still preparing a meal that would satisfy the entire group. The workload became increasingly overwhelming as the family grew and people's expectations rose. What had started as cooking for 18 people became cooking for 25, then 30 people, as relatives married and had children. The grocery bill alone became a significant financial burden, easily costing $400 to $500 for all the ingredients needed for such an elaborate meal. I was spending my entire Christmas break shopping, prepping, cooking, and cleaning. I'd start preparing dishes 3 days before Christmas, work from dawn until late evening on Christmas Eve, then spend Christmas Day in the kitchen instead of enjoying time with family. By the time everyone left, I was exhausted and had barely participated in the actual celebration. The most frustrating part was that no one else offered to help with the significant workload. Family members would arrive, expecting a full feast to be ready, eat their fill, then leave without offering to clean up or contribute to the effort. I'd be stuck with mountains of dishes and hours of cleanup while everyone else relaxed and socialized. When I tried to suggest that maybe we could start sharing cooking responsibilities or simplify the meal, I was met with resistance and guilt trips. People said I was the best cook in the family and that my food was what made Christmas special. They'd say that changing the tradition would disappoint my grandmother, or that it wouldn't feel like Christmas without my elaborate meal. Over the years, I started feeling increasingly resentful about the Christmas cooking responsibility. It had stopped being something I enjoyed and had become a dreaded obligation that consumed my entire holiday break. I felt trapped by family expectations and guilty about wanting to step back from something that everyone else valued so highly. This year, I decided I needed to set boundaries and reclaim my Christmas holiday. In October, I told my family that I wouldn't be cooking Christmas dinner and that we needed to make alternative arrangements. I explained that the workload had become too overwhelming and that I wanted to be able to participate in Christmas as a family member rather than spending the entire day working in the kitchen. The reaction was immediate and intense. My mother said I was being selfish and that I was ruining Christmas for everyone. She said the family had been counting on me and that it was too late to make other arrangements. My father accused me of abandoning family traditions and said I was being ungrateful for all the support the family had given me over the years. Other family members joined in the pressure campaign. My aunt said she was disappointed in my attitude and that she'd always admired my dedication to family traditions. My uncle suggested that maybe I just needed help with grocery shopping or prep work, missing the point that I didn't want to be responsible for coordinating the entire meal anymore. The most manipulative response came from my cousin, who said that my grandmother would be heartbroken if she knew I was abandoning the recipes she'd taught me. She said that continuing the cooking tradition was a way to honor my grandmother's memory, and that I was being disrespectful to her legacy by stepping back. Several family members tried to negotiate compromises that still left me responsible for the majority of the work. They offered to bring side dishes or help with cleanup, but they still expected me to cook the turkey, coordinate the menu, and manage the overall meal preparation. These offers felt like token gestures that didn't address the fundamental problem of me being solely responsible for everyone's Christmas dinner. As Christmas approached, the pressure intensified. My mother started calling me weekly to ask if I'd changed my mind about cooking. Other relatives would mention how much they were looking forward to my Christmas dinner, as if I'd never told them I wasn't cooking this year. Some people seemed to be deliberately ignoring my boundary setting in hopes that I'd cave under pressure. 2 weeks before Christmas, my mother announced that she'd volunteered to host Christmas dinner at her house instead. But when I asked about her plans for cooking, she said she was hoping I'd reconsider and help her with the meal preparation, since she didn't know my grandmother's recipes and had never cooked for such a large group. I realized that my family was trying to manipulate me into cooking by changing the location, but not the fundamental expectation that I'd be responsible for the meal. I told my mother firmly that I wouldn't be helping with cooking regardless of where Christmas dinner was held, and that if she wanted to host, she needed to figure out her own menu and preparation plans. The situation exploded when my mother said she couldn't possibly cook for 30 people by herself, and that if I didn't help, Christmas would be ruined for everyone. She said she'd rather cancel Christmas entirely than serve an inferior meal that would disappoint the family. That's when I realized how manipulative and dysfunctional this whole situation had become. My family was essentially threatening to cancel Christmas rather than figure out alternative arrangements that didn't rely on my unpaid labor. They were treating my cooking as more important than actually being together as a family. I told my mother that if she wanted to cancel Christmas rather than adapt the tradition, that was her choice to make. I said I'd offered months of advance notice that I wouldn't be cooking, and that it wasn't my responsibility to solve the family's dinner planning problems. Christmas Day arrived with no organized family gathering. Some relatives ended up having smaller celebrations at their own homes, while others went to restaurants or accepted invitations from friends. My parents spent Christmas alone and barely spoke to me for weeks afterward. The fallout has been significant and long-lasting. Several family members have accused me of being selfish and destroying family traditions. They've said that I ruined Christmas for everyone because I refused to do something I'd been doing for years. Some relatives have stopped speaking to me entirely, saying they're disappointed in how I've changed and become less family-oriented. Others have been more supportive and said they didn't realize how much work I'd been doing every year or how overwhelming the responsibility had become. A few cousins have apologized for not offering more help and have said they understand why I needed to step back from the cooking commitment. The most hurtful responses have come from family members who've accused me of being vindictive and deliberately trying to hurt people by not cooking. They've said that I knew how important the Christmas dinner tradition was to everyone and that I chose to destroy it out of spite or selfishness. I keep wondering if I handled this situation correctly. Maybe I should have tried harder to find compromise solutions that would have preserved the family gathering while reducing my workload. But I also feel like 7 years of unpaid labor and increasing demands was already more than generous, and that my family's unwillingness to adapt or help showed how little they actually valued my contribution. The hardest part is feeling like I've been made the villain in a situation where I was being taken advantage of for years. My family has reframed my boundary setting as selfishness and has blamed me for the consequences of their own inflexibility and unreasonable expectations. That's the end of that story. 7 years of single-handedly cooking for 30 people while everyone else shows up empty-handed is beyond generous. It's being taken advantage of. The family's response of threatening to cancel Christmas rather than learn to cook or hire catering shows exactly how entitled they'd become to her unpaid labor. Let's move to our final story, which involves relationship drama that escalated into the kind of manipulation that makes you question everything about human nature. Am I the bad person for breaking up with my girlfriend after she lied about being pregnant? I dated my ex-girlfriend Madison for about 1.5 years. And what I thought was a loving relationship turned out to be built on manipulation and deception that I'm still trying to process months later. The way things ended has left me questioning my judgment about people and relationships in general. Madison and I met through mutual friends and seemed to have a lot in common. She was funny, intelligent, and easy to be around. We shared similar interests in music and movies, enjoyed outdoor activities together, and generally had what felt like a healthy, balanced relationship. For the first year, things were really good between us. The problem started when we began having conversations about our future together. I was 28 and Madison was 26, and we'd reached the point in our relationship where it made sense to discuss long-term goals and compatibility. During these discussions, it became clear that we had very different timelines for major life events. Madison was eager to get engaged and start planning a wedding within the next year. She'd bring up engagement rings, wedding venues, and marriage timelines regularly. She seemed to have very specific ideas about when these things should happen, and became frustrated when I expressed hesitation about moving so quickly. I cared about Madison deeply, but I felt like 18 months wasn't enough time to make such major life decisions. I wanted to continue building our relationship and see how things developed naturally, rather than rushing into engagement because of arbitrary timelines. I thought this was a reasonable approach that showed I was taking our relationship seriously. Madison's response to my hesitation was to escalate the pressure rather than respect my perspective. She'd make comments about how most couples get engaged after a year of dating and suggest that my reluctance meant I wasn't serious about our future together. She'd point to friends who'd gotten engaged quickly and imply that I was being unnecessarily cautious. The engagement pressure created tension in our relationship that affected other aspects of our connection. Madison would bring up marriage during unrelated conversations and seemed to interpret everything through the lens of whether it indicated progress toward engagement. What should have been enjoyable experiences together became opportunities for her to hint about rings or weddings. I tried to communicate with Madison about finding a balance between planning for the future and enjoying our current relationship. I explained that I needed more time to feel confident about such a major commitment and that rushing wouldn't benefit either of us. I thought honest communication would help us work through the timeline differences. Instead of respecting my perspective, Madison became more creative about creating urgency around engagement. She'd manufacture relationship crises that she claimed could only be resolved by getting engaged. She'd threaten to break up if I couldn't commit to marriage timelines, then apologize and say she was just scared of wasting time with someone who didn't want the same things. 3 months ago, Madison told me she was pregnant. She was crying when she shared the news and said she'd taken multiple home pregnancy tests that were all positive. She showed me photos of the test results and seemed genuinely shocked and overwhelmed by the situation. My initial reaction was complicated. We'd been careful about birth control, but accidents happen, and I knew we needed to figure out how to handle an unplanned pregnancy together. Despite my concerns about our relationship timeline, I felt responsible and wanted to be supportive during what seemed like a genuinely difficult situation. Madison's response to the pregnancy news was to immediately start talking about how this changed everything between us. She said we needed to get engaged right away, since we were going to be parents together. She suggested that the pregnancy was a sign that we should stop overthinking our relationship and commit to building a family together. I told Madison that while the pregnancy definitely affected our situation, I didn't think we should make major decisions based on panic or feeling pressured. I said I wanted to be involved and supportive regardless of what we decided about marriage, but that I still needed time to process such life-changing news. Madison seemed hurt by my response and said she couldn't believe I was still hesitating about commitment when we were going to have a child together. She said she needed to know that I was fully committed to our relationship and our future family, and that continued uncertainty from me was making an already stressful situation worse. Over the following weeks, Madison's behavior became increasingly erratic and demanding. She'd have emotional breakdowns about the pregnancy and our relationship, then accuse me of not being supportive enough when I tried to comfort her. She'd make dramatic statements about raising a child alone if I couldn't commit to marriage, then get angry when I tried to discuss practical co-parenting arrangements. The pregnancy seemed to intensify all of Madison's existing pressures about engagement and marriage. She'd say things like how she couldn't plan for the future without knowing whether I was going to propose, and how the uncertainty was causing stress that might affect the pregnancy. She was using the pregnancy to create emotional urgency around decisions I'd been reluctant to rush. I started feeling manipulated by how Madison was handling the pregnancy situation. Every conversation became about my commitment level and willingness to get engaged, rather than focusing on practical decisions about prenatal care, finances, or how we wanted to handle becoming parents. It felt like she was using the pregnancy as leverage to get what she'd wanted all along. My concerns grew when I noticed inconsistencies in Madison's pregnancy symptoms and medical appointments. She'd claimed to have severe morning sickness, but would eat normally when she thought I wasn't paying attention. She'd talk about doctor's appointments, but would always have excuses for why I couldn't accompany her or why she couldn't provide documentation of her medical care. When I asked to attend a prenatal appointment with Madison, she became defensive and said I was being controlling. She said she needed space to process the pregnancy without feeling monitored, and that my requests to be involved were causing her stress. These responses seemed strange for someone who claimed to want full commitment and partnership. 2 months into the supposed pregnancy, I discovered that Madison had been lying about the entire situation. I found unused pregnancy tests hidden in her bathroom cabinet, along with a bottle of a hormone supplement that could potentially cause false positive results on home pregnancy tests. When I confronted her about these items, the truth came out. Madison admitted that she'd never been pregnant and had been faking the entire situation to pressure me into proposing. She'd researched ways to manipulate pregnancy tests and had been deliberately creating false positive results to show me. She'd been lying about doctor's appointments, pregnancy symptoms, and everything else related to the supposed pregnancy. I was completely devastated by Madison's confession. She'd put me through months of emotional stress, made me believe I was going to be a father, and manipulated one of the most significant life events possible to try to force me into marriage. The level of deception and manipulation was beyond anything I could have imagined from someone I loved and trusted. When I demanded an explanation for her behavior, Madison said she'd been desperate because she felt like I was never going to propose on my own timeline. She said she'd been trying to show me that we could handle major life challenges together and that the fake pregnancy was meant to prove our compatibility as partners. Madison also claimed that she'd been planning to miscarry after I proposed, and that no one would have been hurt by her deception since everything would have worked out the way she wanted. She seemed to genuinely believe that her manipulation was justified because her ultimate goal was marriage, which she claimed would have made both of us happy. I immediately broke up with Madison after learning about her deception. I told her that lying about pregnancy was one of the most cruel and manipulative things someone could do in a relationship, and that I could never trust her again after such an elaborate scheme. I said her willingness to fake such a significant life event showed a level of disregard for my emotions and consent that made continuing our relationship impossible. Madison's response to the breakup was to claim that I was overreacting to what she called a mistake made out of love. She said she'd never intended to hurt me, and that her deception came from wanting to be with me, not from malicious intent. She accused me of being unforgiving and unable to understand how much pressure she'd been feeling about our relationship timeline. She also tried to minimize the severity of her actions by saying that no real harm had been done since no one was actually pregnant. She suggested that I was being dramatic by treating her white lie as if it were a serious betrayal, and that couples work through much worse problems than dishonesty about hypothetical situations. The manipulation continued even after our breakup. Madison started telling mutual friends that I'd broken up with her because I wasn't ready for the responsibility of being a father, leaving out the part about her faking the entire pregnancy. She portrayed herself as the victim of my commitment issues, rather than acknowledging her deceptive behavior. Several friends reached out to me with sympathy about the supposed pregnancy loss and breakup, having heard Madison's version of events. I had to explain the actual situation to people who'd been offering condolences for a pregnancy that had never existed. The whole experience was humiliating and emotionally exhausting. Some friends who learned the truth were shocked by Madison's behavior and supportive of my decision to end the relationship immediately. Others thought I should have tried to work through the deception and suggested that Madison's actions, while wrong, came from understandable motivations about wanting commitment and security in our relationship. The most disturbing responses came from people who seemed to think Madison's deception was somehow romantic, or showed how much she cared about our relationship. They suggested that her willingness to go to such extremes proved her love for me, and that I should appreciate her dedication rather than focusing on her dishonest methods. I've been in counseling to process the emotional impact of being deceived about something as significant as pregnancy and potential parenthood. The betrayal of trust feels profound, and I'm struggling with how to evaluate people's honesty and intentions in future relationships. Madison's manipulation has made me question my ability to recognize red flags or trust my instincts about people's character. The aftermath has been complicated by Madison's continued attempts to contact me and minimize the severity of her actions. She sent texts apologizing for lying, but still trying to justify her behavior based on her emotions and desires for our relationship. She suggested that we could work through the trust issues if I were willing to forgive her and understand her perspective. I've had to block Madison's communication attempts because her messages were preventing me from moving forward emotionally. But mutual friends still occasionally share information about her, including her apparent belief that I'll eventually realize I made a mistake by ending our relationship over what she considers a forgivable error in judgment. The whole experience has left me feeling manipulated and violated in ways I didn't know were possible in romantic relationships. Madison's willingness to fake pregnancy for months shows a level of calculating deception that I find deeply disturbing. I feel like I never really knew the person I thought I was in love with. That's the end of that story. Faking pregnancy to manipulate someone into marriage is one of the most psychologically damaging things you can do to a partner. Madison's behavior wasn't a mistake made out of love, for quite. It was calculated emotional abuse, designed to manipulate someone into a major life commitment through deception. That brings us to the end of today's collection of absolutely wild Reddit drama. These stories really show how far people will go when boundaries get crossed and manipulation tactics come out. From family members who turn generosity into obligation, to romantic partners who fake pregnancies for engagement rings, we've seen some truly disturbing behavior disguised as love and care. If you enjoyed diving into this chaos with me, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more content like this. And if you're still here listening to this at whatever ungodly hour you're watching, drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from. I love hearing from all of you night owls and insomniacs who keep me company during these deep dives into internet drama. Until next time, remember that other people's poor choices make for great entertainment but terrible life strategies. Take care of yourselves out there, and I'll see you in tomorrow's video.
you